Are you starting it? Mm-hmm. Oh. So I'm going to do like a little intro. Okay. Today I'm interviewing Theodore M. Robinson, and his birth date is April 14th, 1919. He served in World War II in the Navy, and his highest rank was lieutenant commander. Today's date is December 11th, 2010, and I'm interviewing at the home of Mr. Robinson. My name is Caroline Paikoff, and I will be the interviewer. I am with fellow student Emily May Wilcox, who is operating the camera. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress as part of the Da Vinci High School America at War project.
Oh, that's good.
So, what was your life like before being commissioned into the war?
Well, I grew up in that terrible depression, the real depression, when about half the people, not 12%, were out of work. And my dad had died when I was 8 months old, and I was being brought up by my grandpa, who was stone deaf, lame, poor janitor. And he was out of work for 3 years during that awful depression. And in that depression, many of the banks went broke, and my grandpa lost all his life savings in the bank in Brooklyn. And that's what Obama tried to stop this time by assisting the banks, which was a good move, I thought. And so my grandpa was out of work, without job, and he walked in front of a car and tried to commit suicide. And that left my mother with 2 little kids. I was 8 months old and my brother was 2. And my dad's will, he died in the flu epidemic. My dad did it right after World War I. They had this terrible flu epidemic that killed more people in all the wars in history. And so my mother, the will left us the house and no money, nothing. We had nothing else, and my grandpa had no big job, and my grandpa spent 3 months in the hospital because the night of the funeral was because my grandmother died of fright, literally of fright. And my grandpa walked in front of a car and tried to commit suicide. And we were just desperate, and my mother began selling all our furniture, hawking it actually. People hawked furniture. And she explained to us little kids that, well, Grandma and Grandpa don't need any more because Grandma's dead and Grandpa could never walk upstairs again, and he never could. He was so lame, even if he got out of the hospital. And so we were absolutely desperate. And so that was my background, which was pretty humble. And I started when I was 10 years old selling my grandpa finally got out of the hospital after 3 months, and we planted a big garden right in the middle of New York City, a front lawn, a back lawn, and I sold vegetables door to door in the summer, but there were no vegetables in the winter because New York there's snow. And my grandpa had a brother who had a farm in upstate New York, and he was killing his pigs and making little sausage meat things out of them. And so at 10 years old, I was trying to sell pork sausage meat in a Jewish neighborhood. Now that took some real salesmanship. And so I've always been kind of a salesman ever since, because we either ate pork sausage meat all the time, or if we wanted any milk or tea or cornflakes or anything else, we had to sell some of the pork sausage meat to the Jewish people. And that's how we got by, but eventually my grandpa got a job, and then we had a wonderful, wonderful family, the Scotts, that were direct descendants of Admiral Sampson, the hero of the Spanish-American War, and all Naval Academy graduates, all Annapolis graduates. And Captain Scott had been head of supply in World War I for the United States Navy. He had been a big captain in the Navy. And he started the Army-Navy stores. You might guess how he got a hold of some of those Navy supplies, having been the chief of staff of supply. And the Army-Navy stores, for you young folks, was the Walmarts of its day. It was the first nationwide discount chain that sold to all over the world. And the worst of the Depression, the more the Army-Navy stores prospered, because people were buying second-hand Army stuff and Navy stuff. And they finally found out our situation, and they saved us. They finally, after 3 years without a job, Captain Scott had never met my grandpa until his son died. And my grandpa, we kind of hated my grandpa, but because he was so poor looking and he had no shoes. And my grandpa came to Captain Scott's son's funeral, and Captain Scott saw him, and the next thing you know, my grandpa had a job at the Mack Truck Company. And 2 weeks later, I saw 2 big Mack trucks in the Scott's yard that said Army-Navy stores on the side. So you might guess how that happened. And things got better. Very slowly, we began to try to buy our furniture back. And finally, I was able to go to college. I was able to go to Duke University, which wasn't as famous then as it is now, but it was very cheap, actually, because it was in the South. This will amaze you, young people. It was $795 a year to go to Duke, which is now $34,500 to go to Duke. And so I was able to go, and I'll never forget my goodbye to my grandpa. I went in my grandpa's room to say goodbye, and my grandfather was still so lame, even though he had a job. To get up, he had to hang on to a chair like this to stand up. And his chair was gone. I said, "Grandpa, where's your chair?" And he said, "Son, we needed some money for the bus to go down to Duke in Durham." And that's what a wonderful man he was. He had to fix up a rope to get up, and I remember going to Duke, and I used to study in the library where they had this beautiful fine arts library at Duke where I used to study. And every time I went to get up and go out with the guys and have a beer, I saw all those beautiful chairs in this room, and I stayed sitting in mine because I knew my grandpa didn't have any chair. And that's why I became 1 grade off Phi Beta Kappa at Duke, even though I had 4 different jobs. And my senior year, I was sending money home. So I went to Duke, and because I went to Duke, I became a Navy officer. And I volunteered for PT boats. PT boats were like suicide boats, and I volunteered for PTs. And I found when I got in there, I was with a lot of famous people. And one of them was Jack Kennedy, whose father was ambassador to England. Another was WWII, who isn't familiar with you people, but he was the Joe Montana of his day. He was an all-American football player and a Rhodes Scholar at the same time. Well, he was our intelligence officer. And so we had some mostly rich Ivy League graduates. 60% of our PT Squadron 6 was Annapolis graduates, and they were the skippers. And 40% were from the Ivy League. And the reason they were from the Ivy League, like Harvard and Princeton, is they had to have crewed on power boats before the war. They had to have some power boat experience to get into PT boats, which were really large, powerful, when I mean powerful, 6,000 horsepower on a little 80-foot boat, because our only defense was our speed, because we were going against big steel Japanese destroyers and cruisers and so on with torpedoes. And I got into that because while I was poor and church mouse, I had an uncle that was a millionaire. And when I was in younger than you are, when I was 13 and 14, I crewed on my Uncle Frank's yacht. So I could say I had power boat experience. I didn't tell him we ran the yacht aground. But